how's a Gen Z guy and being a traditionalist? How do those two things live together in one body?
What I would say to that is I was exposed to tradition. And as I was exposed to it, I have developed a form, its appreciation doesn't do it justice. I am in awe of a traditional style of worship. There's something about it. And I don't know, that's something I feel like is a part of the calling that God's placed in my life, is this hunger and desire for the beauty that the church has.
Hi, my name's Tim.
And I'm Parker.
This is Ray's podcast, where today we're switching things up. I'm going to welcome all of you here to this very special episode of the Rage Podcast, where we're going to learn about this, my illustrious co-host here, the Reverend Dr. Bishop Parker Miley. A couple of those titles actually fit. But today we're going to talk about, what is a pastor from Gen Z look like? How did Captain Traditionalist, Mr. Hardcore Traditional over here, come out of a generation that typically rejects that and become the person that you guys enjoy in the podcast every week? How did he pull that off? And today we're going to be talking about that. So Parker, are you excited about letting your whole life be laid out to be?
Yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to air out all of the process of my life to this point.
Yes. So any ridicule that you want to put in the comments, we would appreciate. And
I will gladly appreciate.
Yes.
Actually.
Well, Parker, why don't you tell us, we'll kind of go through some of the beginning parts quickly. But what was it like growing up here in St. Mary's?
St. Mary's is a perfect community, and I mean that wholeheartedly. And I say perfect because you can say, oh, well, no place is perfect, and that's true. But to me, my town is everything to me. I love this place, and there's it has a huge impact on who I am and how I was raised, and I credit a lot to the community that I was brought up in. So I would say, St. Mary's had a huge role kind of in my life, being a safe, friendly community of people that wanted to invest, and this is a key thing there, they want always to invest back into their future, and I think that was a big thing that I can accredit a lot of my life to, is how I grew up in a community that focused on its young people.
I can tell you, as somebody who has the privilege of practically sharing an office with you. I mean, there is a wall between us, but there's a door that... does that door close? I don't know. But I can tell you that his heart is definitely in this community. There's not a doubt in my mind. For the first time I met him when he was like 12 or whatever he was, he's been a part of being very excited about helping St. Mary's. And again, it comes through loud and clear in everything he does, and we're excited to talk about that here today. So, all right, so that's where you came from. Tell us where you are now. What's happening in your life now?
So now I am, I'm a sophomore in college. I go to, again, referencing how much I appreciate and love my community, I didn't leave for college. I was lucky enough to have a university right in the backyard of St. Mary's. So I am going to college. I'm a sophomore in college to be a future educator for hopefully St. Mary City Schools. And So that's that aspect, but to pay for college and kind of my work that I do is now I am a pastor. I'm a pastor of of my own congregation, Walnut Grove, which is in St. Mary's, just north on the beautiful countryside, if I can say that. And also I have a role on staff here at Wayne Street, which is the church I grew up in, and my family grew up in, and everything else. And now I get to serve on staff here as well.
And to kind of explain the relationship between Wayne Street and Walnut Grove is we call ourselves sister congregations. That's kind of what we are. We're a joint together. Really, the biggest thing we share is Parker, because Parker's technically on staff for us, but he works out there in a campus ministry kind of setting. And we appreciate that because then he's able to run some of the administration structure here at Wayne Street, which is his technical job here. And then he's able to do a lot of the preaching and the pastoral care and growth and discipleship and so on and so forth at Walnut Grove. It's a great relationship that we have kind of forged together. Because Walnut Grove had been with Grace, and then when Grace kind of went their own way, which was good for them because it was a great step in the right direction for them, it left Walnut Grove kind of out there, and they needed somebody, and we had Parker, and everything kind of worked together. And that's where we are now. So they got Parker, and they're growing leaps and bounds out there, doing very well from what I've heard. And we were out there just last night at Fall Fest.
Fall Fest, yeah.
And we ate a bunch of no calorie pies and a lot of good soup, and had a hayride. It was a beautiful evening, and just a lot of events like that. And how many people would you guess were there last night?
I counted for Walnut Grove. We had I had about 50 of my parishioners there. Yeah. And in total, I think we had 90 to 80 folks were there. 40
to 50 is about what I would guess from Wayne Street. So that was really good. And yeah, it was a good evening. And those are the kind of exciting things that can happen. But the real question here is how did a guy who comes out of the generation Gen Z, right?
Yes.
Is that where you're from? Yep. How's a Gen Z guy and being a traditionalist? How do those two things live together in one body?
That's a good question, and this might terrify the audience when I have to say this, but we got to go back a little bit to the beginning. Going back to my childhood, I was blessed with and babysitter's the wrong word, because this woman was practically family to me, and she was to my mother as well, but her name was Ethel. I could never say Ethel, so I always called her Effie, but she was just a saintly woman. And she was the babysitter for my mom and all her siblings, and then she was the babysitter for me.
And is that the name of your mom's store?
Yes.
Comes from that? Well, I never realized that.
Going a little family interest there. My family's been always very involved in St. Mary's, started several of their own companies and businesses in St. Mary's and everything else. And my mom eventually, kind of referencing as I go back and look at Ethel, she played such a role in our life. One of the companies or businesses that my family owns is a woman's clothing line that's called Effie's, and that is because of the impact that she had.
I never knew where that name came from. I always wondered. Yeah,
that is because of the impact she had on me, truly my entire family. But again, as I said, she was a saint. She had. She was tough, that's for sure. She was one of the babysitters that said, if you were gonna cry or pout, she said, I'll give you a reason to cry, right? And she wasn't afraid to do the tough love, but she also was constantly being an example of Christ in my life. From just how she carried herself. I can't remember an exact time when she would ever open up the scriptures, but she was living a life for and with Christ, and it was just proclaimed through everything she's done. And she was an excellent cook, and I mean that was all given to the glory of God. Everything she's done, everything she's ever done. But she was tough, and she was very traditional. She was not going to let anything slide, to put that in that terminology there. But she had a huge role in my upbringing, and because I was with her every day of the week. Mm-hmm. And then
what time frame are we talking? Like what years between?
We are talking from the time my mother was able to leave me alone in that house. So we're talking probably from not alone in the house, all right? But we're going 2 years old, walking, talking, all right, until I started kindergarten.
So, and what years would that be? Like 2000?
That would have been 2005 to 2008.
Yeah. Now the reason I bring that up is because when he talks, you think he's talking from like the 1960s and 70s, because that sounds, I grew up in the 80s, and that sounds like how things were in the 80s. We drank out of the garden hose and things like that. And so when he talks, and I want you to realize that influence came from the early 2000s, which is probably not typical to a lot of your peers' experiences.
I'm the only one that knows what a switch is in my generation. That also talks about the discipline, right? If you have the switches running out in the yard and finding a durable stick for just threatening.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, that's who she was, and she played a huge role in my life and things like that. But so did my church. All right, so I was with her all the weekdays. On the weekends, though, on Sundays when I was a young kid, I attended, as I mentioned earlier, Wayne Street. And Wayne Street used to, again, I'm going to reference over here because this is where the old church was, and that's where I went to church at. It was a beautifully designed, very traditional sanctuary. I mean, it was built-in pulpit, choir loft, balcony. I mean, it was just designed traditionally. Mm-hmm. And everything that went on in worship was just so mesmerizing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because it was the only place I could find something that was completely contrary to the world.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where else in the world do we hear hymns singing? Where do we hear singing of hymns? Anywhere else in the world except the church? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. Where do we hear, why are we having a green displayed on the altar? What is the significance behind all these different garbs and everything else in the church? It was just unique. There was and I remember, as I reflect back from the very beginning of my childhood, that constantly intrigued me, of kind of looking at the separation the church had from the world in every feasible level. It was just so contrary. You come in and from the singing, whether it be the prayers, the all-togetherness of saying, all right, wait, now the doxology is going to be sung, and everyone naturally knows, stand up. It was just something beautiful about the syncness, and the community behind it. Everyone knew it was supposed to happen. And it was the only place where that was going to happen was in the church.
Yeah, and which I have no doubt you're correct. One question I have is, now, you speak very eloquently about that now. It sounds like a beautiful image. Honestly, I can remember images very similar to where I grew up, 30 years prior to you. But the piece of that I would ask is, and this is the part I want everybody to hear, were you always excited to go? Were you always excited to be in the church?
Good question, no. I was not always excited.
Did you hear that? So somebody made him go.
Yes. Yeah, I lived a block away from Wayne Street. So I remember very well walking to church on Sunday morning. Didn't like the walk, didn't like sitting there, didn't like constantly being told to be quiet, and all those things like that when I was a kid.
Somebody had to do that for you. Now, who was it?
My mother and her mother and so forth. I remember getting my knee pinched if I would to drop a Hot Wheel, and put the fear of God in you very quickly. But, so yeah, when I was a young kid, oh yeah, absolutely. My family brought me to church. And through that kind of me being brought there, I was able to eventually, I think, probably come to terms with saying, well, I'm not escaping this. So I might as well, and as I continued to come, that's where that kind of interest came in of saying, what is happening here? Why is this place so different? The beautiful design, the way the light shines. I mean, it's just, you can picture it all so well. And I hope maybe some of you can relate to that, but the way the sun shines in a stained glass window is an image that will constantly be engraved.
Nothing else.
Engraved in my, and we have beautiful stained glass windows, but it's here.
And I bet you didn't always appreciate that. And that's the piece that I think is important for people to see is, you guys on the Rage podcast who watch us often, you'll see Parker talk about things. He wasn't always this way. Yeah, there was some ingrained stuff and he was, some of that, but a lot of that's been given to him as a gift. And I think that's the part that we miss. But, Parker Miley wasn't born a traditionalist. He was made into one. Yeah. And through intention and through the love of his family and the influence of his community. And I think that's the part we lose when we say, well, kids don't grow up that way anymore. That's right, because they don't grow up that way anymore.
Well, and what I would say to that is I was exposed to tradition.
Yeah.
And as I was exposed to it, I have developed a form, its appreciation doesn't do it justice. I think I am in awe of a traditional style of worship. There's something about it. And I don't know, that's something I feel like is a part of the calling that God's placed in my life, is this hunger and desire for the beauty that the church has and had the ability to offer the world.
And the thing I'm going to keep coming back to, because he is articulating it so well, is he wasn't born that way. That was given to him. Yes. And a lot of times when we look at kids now and we think it's just easier to leave them at home than to fight with them and bring them, well, you're not going to get a Parker Miley out of that attitude.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get somebody who's going to respect tradition and want to preserve the past and those kind of things. That has to be placed in a child just like it was placed in Parker. As I sit here, in the last, 5 years or so that we've known each other, I he was so young when I started dealing with him. He was probably 16 or 17, and it was so funny at that time that I thought, gosh, you must have always been this way. I knew you weren't, but it was so well set in you at that time that I thought you must have always been that way. And it's interesting to hear you talk about how that was imparted to you and how it's something that was important to you.
So to bring that back, there was a season in my family's life where we did not attend church. Yep. My siblings were older than me. I'm the youngest in the family. And so they were getting into sports and everything else. The constant battle that churches still struggle with today is how sports take place on Sunday mornings. And so I wasn't in church for this long time, yet I still had that hunger for this thing that is completely contradictory to the world.
Okay, so give me an approximation. You were how old when you left?
When I left, it was probably 7. I'm going to go 7.
7 or 8. Okay.
Yep.
All right, and then you came back. I remember you telling this story. You came back when?
I came back around 7th, 8th grade.
And it was a special service, wasn't it?
It was I had another traditional aspect in my life. I had great-grandparents. Okay. Every great-grandparent I was able to meet. Yeah. And huge.
Which is a gift of itself. Yeah.
Huge impact, right? Mm-hmm. And that I can't even explain how much of an impact that would be. Yep. But during that middle school year from 7th and 8th grade, all of my great-grandparents were passing away. I mean, they were all in their late 90s, early 90s, and health just catches up, right? So I was exposed back into church through the funeral services of my great-grandparents, and that's when that kind of flame was rekindled. Yep. And I just went full force. And to say referencing how you said, well, I always saw you just seemed like I always had it. I think it's because through that moment, that's where I decided to say, I have to make this my own now. So I was exposed to the tradition, yet in those moments, I had to make it my own here. Yeah. Why am I practicing this? Why do I believe this way?
Yeah, and again, this is to me is the most important part of this video. Yeah, learning about Parker is cool, but his testimony to say it was placed in me when I was young. I was away from it for a while, but at a tragic moment when I needed something, it all came back. Yep. And I think that's the thing is, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's older, he won't stray from it. I think that's very appropriate. I mean, you're living proof of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very cool because sometimes we think, well, they're away now and we're going to come back for confirmation and whatever. And that doesn't always work. But for Parker, it did because it was a legitimate part of his life. Mm-hmm. And it came back at a tragic moment. And so, as he grows up and things and he continues to develop his call story, that death of your great-grandparents is going to be a significant piece of it.
It was the turning point. Yeah. It was.
Yeah, and it's in tragedy and trying to respond to tragedy that came back to you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important thing to see, that had the initial effort not been made, there'd have been nothing to come back to.
Yeah, again, if I was not exposed to anything, when I was a kid never brought into church, then that moment when my grandparents passed away, I wouldn't have known how to interact with anything.
You had nothing.
I wouldn't have had an initial taste, to use that terminology, of what that whole grace thing was about, right?
So throughout the course of going through those, having that number of significant deaths in a very short time span, what that did is it lit in you something to be connected to.
Yes.
And the idea of having roots, I mean, that's what you just clearly described. And it's fascinating how people would allow their children not to have that.
Yeah.
And I think that's too bad. Not to say everybody's going to become Parker, but it does say that everybody's going to go through a season of challenge like that. And you're going to have something to come back to. And if you don't do the work, there's nothing there. You're grasping at straws.
And I find in my life that there's it's a constant progression even still. Right now, I've been working for a church for the last 3 years. But I gave my first sermon when, about 3 years ago, just last month. And as I reflect on that, and I think Tim would be the one that could have a clear view of this, mm-hmm. but the beauty in the traditions that my parents and church family gave me have been reinforced and come back full-fledged. Mm-hmm. And it's because as I reflect on it, I was like, those are all the things I was exposed to when I was a kid, right? When we were in church, there was these elements that took place and everything. And I now that I'm even looking at this myself, I realize, I was like, well, that's just the way it was. Mm-hmm. And to use a phrase that's mentioned in many households, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
And the significant thing that he's not telling you is the reason he had that opportunity was another tragedy, and that I had a near-death experience. I became deathly ill, ended up in the hospital down in Columbus, and it opened up the opportunity. Mm-hmm. for Parker to be there and step in and be a part of that. And again, had the investment not been made earlier on, he wouldn't have been prepared for that moment. And let me tell you something, I about burst the buttons right off my shirt that Sunday, just watching him be up there thinking, man, this kid's 17. But he had that foundation, Yeah, there were some rough corners, and and Parker needed to learn what punctuation is when he writes a sermon. We talked about that. But as far as the fundamentals, he had it. Yeah, there's been a few little pointers and things I've taught him along the way, but the base was still there, placed in him long before he and I ever met. And to me, that's been the exciting thing, is to watch that come out. But to go back to our original question, how does a traditionalist live in the same body as a Gen Z person? It's because he was made that way. Not necessarily by God, but by the circumstances he was placed in.
But I want to reiterate something there. The hidden theme of what we've been saying here is if I wasn't exposed to the tradition, then I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done. And now there's a huge difference from exposing tradition or exposing the beauty of tradition.
Yeah, that's very true.
You can expose tradition and it looks horrible and awful and nasty and repetitive and meaningless. If you can expose the beauty of tradition, the meaning of why you do things and the reason you do them, if you can express why this is taking place, it has a much greater impact on a person's life, especially in a generation where they hear the word tradition and feel a knot in their stomach.
Run from it.
And want to run. If you can expose the beauty of tradition, because it is beautiful, you're going to have we can have a lot more success in trying to cling on to those things that, again, Tim's generation, before Tim's generation, think are beautiful, yet now my generation finds disgusting. You need to, as you expose tradition, explain the tradition. Why does this happen? Why do you do this? Why do you wake up Sunday morning and come here? Why do you put money in an offering plate, right? That's the most bizarre thing in the world. Where else do you see that? It doesn't take place anywhere else.
Yeah, and I didn't know Parker when he was 5, but I know him today, and I have no doubt he asked lots of questions while he was here. Somebody had to answer those questions for you, whether it be the pastor at that time, your family members, whether it be Effie or whoever it was. But somebody put that in there. However, you didn't realize how beautiful it was until you hit that number of significant deaths in a short amount of time. It was through that, when you needed something to hang on to, you said, oh my word, this stuff actually means something if you hang on to it. Yeah. And instead of throwing it away and coming on with some kind of, a theology you made up yourself, you said, I'm going to embrace what's already been given to me, and that's what's brought you here. So it's the idea of the importance of what's happening, in the life of being a traditional person. It's brought through. It's a wonderful thing. And it's a great testimony to what churches have done, historically and technically should still be doing today.
A huge fear of mine is when the church throws down all of its tradition for the claims of, it doesn't attract the young, my generation, or it doesn't appeal anymore, or this one is meaningless, and we just start cutting up things and throwing them out without actually taking a second to say, well, why did we do this for 50 years already? Why did we do this for the last, 5 generations of people that have come to this church, but now decide it's time to stop?
Yeah, and right, and that's exactly right, because there's a big difference between being entertained by something and being prepared for something. The idea of a traditionalist is about preparing, because it may not be super fun to do, recite the words of the Great Thanksgiving and to do the Lord's Prayer and to sing the hymns and things like that. However, you don't also want to be doing silly stuff at somebody's funeral. Yeah. And you don't want to go to a funeral and say, man, this was entertaining, because that's not what that's for.
No, you want to hear, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. You want to hear the things that are valid in that moment in time, the things that you also can cling to. One thing that I've noticed as now that I'm pastoring and going to funeral services, and if you can throw in some of those elements of the tradition, people see that and we're like, wait a second, this is familiar. This reminds me of something. What is it reminding them of other than the beauty of the church, right? And that's, again, we can talk about world traditions, but I'm putting an emphasis on church traditions, right? That's where the matter of importance is here. And I've seen that now as I'm pastoring, doing funerals, and if I can throw in a traditional element, I can notice when I say it how the crowd's heart is like, well, this is familiar. I've heard this before.
And it's comforting. Not only is it familiar, it's comforting.
And it's something notice, and yeah, that's a whole nother topic, but it's something easy to remember. It's always something easy to remember. Think of all the traditional things in church, right? It's engraved in our brains, right? You can say, go through some of the communion liturgy, right? And you lift up your hearts, right?
Yeah,
we lift them up
to the Lord.
Yeah, and things like that. We know the response. It is good and right that we give thanks and praise to our Lord, and we just know those things.
Yeah. So I think what we have settled here is the age-old debate between nature and nurture. Traditionalists are not nature. They're not natural. They are nurtured. They are created. And that's what happened to Parker. And I got to tell you, as somebody who's gotten to be alongside you for these years, I appreciate the work you put in, because I got to tell you, you guys don't see the struggle behind the scenes. I mean, there really is. And he takes his job very seriously, and it means something to him. And it's not because it's entertaining.
Yeah.
So, not to say we don't do some entertaining stuff along the way and have some very entertaining conversations along the way, but he has been given something that he realizes the importance of. And by doing that, he's got a foundation under him that unfortunately many of his peers are not going to have, because they want to be entertained and engaged in that way. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, I guess?
For the people of my generation that find disgust in tradition, before you look at the natural disgust behind the word tradition itself, look into and just try to find one glimpse of beauty. And if you can try to find the meaning, the importance, and the beauty behind it, you're not going to find a little. You're going to find a lot.
And you're not going to be able to get to that if you reject it outright, just before you even have a chance at it. Well, thank you all for tuning in as we had a chance to hear Parker, a postage stamp size sample of Parker's story. We all know it's longer than that, but to be able to help us understand where he came from in this journey that he's on. And we're glad he's on it. And there's going to be a lot of people, there are a lot of people today who's glad he's on it. And for the next 40, 50 years, there's going to be people who's glad he's on it because of the people he's going to impart this foundation underneath. I guess the only way to end this episode is say, go to church. Yeah. Go sing a hymn. Go read a scripture.
Pay attention in church.
Yes. and know it's there for beauty, not for entertainment. Those are two very different things. All right, guys. Have a great week.